Folks, as we work to become better writers and thinking about how we can use punctuation and different sentence structures to get there, we're going to be looking at how real writers use those things. And we want to be able to figure out why are writers using certain punctuation marks? How can we use them? And how do we determine what the right punctuation mark is? A really helpful tool in those discussions is going to be able to identify the verb or verbs in a sentence and the subjects. We'll talk a little bit more about why, but even before we talk about punctuation, if we can figure out verbs and subjects, we're going to make our lives a whole heck of a lot easier. Let me explain a little bit more. These are some of the questions that we're going to be asking. Why did the writer use that punctuation mark there? Why did they use a comma? Or why did they use a semicolon? Or why didn't they use any punctuation mark at all, other than a period at the end of a sentence? We'll also, of course, ask for our own writing. Do I need punctuation mark here? If so, which punctuation do I need? And if I don't, why not? And of course, sometimes we'll say, how can I incorporate this particular punctuation mark into my own writing? We'll see something like a semicolon or an em dash, and we'll say, okay, first off, how does that work? And how can I use that in my own? I like that. How can I do that? Well, the answer to a lot of these questions is I'm going to say to you, well, we need to notice whether the clauses in the sentence are independent or are they dependent. Okay, pause. We don't know necessarily what that means yet. What's it mean if something's independent or dependent? What's a clause? Well, we need to take one extra step back. Our next video is going to break down what that means for a clause to be independent or dependent. If we can figure that out, it helps us figure out our punctuation marks. But if we're going to figure out if something's independent or dependent, boom, verbs and subjects make the difference. We can determine whether a clause is independent or dependent based on identifying our verbs and our subjects. So again, in our next video, we're going to work on independent versus dependent. But for that to make sense, we have to take one step back and say, let's figure out verbs, let's figure out subjects. If we can be solid on verbs and subjects, then we can be solid on independent and dependent clauses. If we can be solid on independent and dependent clauses, our next video, then boom, we can start asking these questions and putting them into action. And that's where we want to get to. We want to figure out what are writers doing? Why are they doing it? How can we incorporate that into our own writing? So we're going to start small with verbs and subjects. We're going to build on our verbs and subjects by figuring out independent and dependent clauses. And then we're going to take all of that knowledge and we're going to be able to figure out how we use punctuation marks correctly and how other writers use them correctly. So let's start this process. Not because verbs and subjects independently are super valuable, but because they're going to help us understand how to do things down the road. So, big effort here, not necessarily an immediate payoff, but a big payoff in the long run. All right, so let's start here. What in the world is a verb? What in the world is a subject? We're going to start with the verb first because we want to find the verb first. I'll explain why in a moment. There are a lot of different types of verbs, but in their simplest form, we can put them into two categories: action verbs and state of being verbs. Action verbs are those things that we do. It's things that you can see or hear or watch something happen. Like it's an action. A state of being is a little bit different. We'll talk about both. Let's start here with an action. I ran up the stairs. We've got a clear action here, running. Like that's something you can do. So we have a very, very clear action verb here. State of being is a little bit trickier. But think about this first one. I ran up the stairs. You wouldn't say I up the stairs. You had to do something. You had to be something, be doing something. State of being, you're not doing something, you're just being. Here's an example. Izzy is happy. Well, Izzy doesn't happy. That's not the action. You're not happying. You are being happy. State of being. You're being happy. Izzy is being happy. And so notice what I just said. Izzy is being happy. Like, we could pull that word being right down here and say, Izzy is being happy. We don't have to, but it helps us make sense that our verb here isn't happy because Izzy doesn't happy. Izzy is happy. She is being happy. She's in that state of happiness. So verbs can be actions, things that you can see, right? Like see somebody running, or you can do something like that, or a state of being. Izzy is being happy. Those state of beings can be a little bit tricky. Is, are, was, were. We'll see more examples, and the more of them you see, the easier it is to pick up on those. But those are going to be the two major categories we're going to talk about. Action verbs, running, like it's a verb, it's something you do, but a verb can also be a state of being. Izzy is being happy. Those are our verbs. Our subject is the person or the thing doing that verb or being like in that state. So that's why it's actually really helpful to find our verbs first. And we'll talk about this on the next slide. But let's go back to our sentences. I ran up the stairs. Well, if the subject is the person or thing performing the verb, who or what is performing the running? Who ran up the stairs? I did. Same with Izzy is happy. Well, who is being happy? Izzy is. So our subject is that person, or in other examples, that thing doing the verb or being in that state. And you'll notice it usually falls right in front or really gosh darn close to it. And we'll see some examples of that. So that's why we find our verbs first. So our verbs are either an action or a state of being. And the subject is the person or thing doing that verb. All right, let's take a look at some other examples here. We're going to start with some actions. We'll start with some state of beings. Take a second to look through here and try and identify the verbs. Okay, as we take a look, plenty of good action verbs here. Jennifer walked to the store. Walking is clearly our action. I called my mother. Calling, that's something you can do, right? Verb, it's what you do when we talk about an action. Mosquito bites itch, like you can itch, like that's something you do. And drink, you can drink coffee. Or in this case, Mr. Pruder drinks coffee. It's what you do. How about those state of being verbs? So these aren't actions, they're not things that you can see, but it's something that you are or the person is. So let's take a look. State of being. What are those verbs? So we have a great singer, and she is a great singer. What's that state that she's in? Well, she is a great singer. The tennis player was victorious. The tennis player doesn't victorious. That's not the verb. The tennis player was in a state of being victorious. The cat seems unhappy. The cat seems to be in a state of unhappiness. The woman became a doctor. The woman was in a state of becoming a doctor. So, little bit trickier, but when we see them together, we can see our action verbs up top and our state of being verbs down below. Now remember, we also said that a subject is the person or thing performing that verb. So, based on this, we found our verbs. What would our subjects be? Remember, the key is to look right in front. So Jennifer walked to the store. Who walked to the store? Jennifer did. Look right in front. Who called my mother? I called my mother. Boom. What itches? Right? That's a short sentence, but if itch is our verb, what itches? Mosquito bites. Who drinks coffee? Mr. Pruder drinks coffee. Boom. So our subject is falling right in front of our verb. That's true for action verbs. It's the same for state of being verbs. She is a great singer. Well, who is a great singer? She is. The tennis player was victorious. All right, who was in a state of being victorious? Well, the tennis player was. The cat seems unhappy. Who or what seems to be in a state of being unhappy? Boom, the cat. Who was in a state of becoming a doctor? Who became a doctor? Boop. The woman. We can often look right in front of our verb. So that's why I want us to find our verbs first. If we can find the verb first, then we can look right in front of it to find that subject. Okay, last thing on verbs. There are also verb phrases. Let's check out these sentences. These actually have multiple words that come together to become a verb phrase. We have Mr. Pruder was helping the students. We have the boy is hugging his new puppy. There's more than just one word here that makes the verb. To help us understand that, let's check out kind of what we might identify here. We have state of being verbs, right? But we can't actually stop here. Here's why, right? We're able to find our subject, who was helping the students, Mr. Pruder, who is hugging the puppy, the boy. So we're able to find a verb and the subject, so we're still good there. But let's go back to this. Mr. Pruder drinks coffee. We talked about this one. Here's the issue, though. That sentence looks great because what is Mr. Pruder doing to the coffee? He's drinking. Single word here. But if we take that same approach, we can't do that here. What is the boy doing to his new puppy? We wouldn't say the boy is his new puppy, but we would say Mr. Pruder drinks coffee. We wouldn't say Mr. Pruder was the student. We would say there's more to it than that. So Mr. Pruder does what to the coffee? He drinks. Therefore, that's our verb. What's the boy doing to his new puppy? Well, he isn't being his new puppy. He is hugging his new puppy. Both of those words help. Mr. Pruder was the student. He was helping the students. So you'll notice you've got the object here at the end. Mr. Pruder is the subject. The students are the object. The boy is the subject. His new puppy is the object. Mr. Pruder is the subject. His coffee is the object. What is the subject doing to the object? Well, Mr. Pruder was helping. He wasn't was the student. He was helping. The boy is his new puppy. The boy is hugging his new puppy. Fortunately, we don't have to worry about a verb phrase for that last one. So that subject and verb thing still plays a huge role here, but just make sure that we identify every once in a while that it's more than just one word. Just pay attention there. All right, so one last look at it all. We want to make sure we think about action verbs and state of being verbs and be on the lookout for some verb phrases. So here's an action verb, drinks. Here's a state of being verb, is. And here's a verb phrase, was helping. And remember, we can always look right in front of it. Who drinks coffee? Mr. Pruder does. Who is a great singer? Who's in the state of being a great singer? She is a great singer. Who was helping the students? Mr. Pruder was helping the students. Those become our subjects. And therefore, we find our subjects in our verbs. And we also learned a little lesson on objects. Great thing just to keep in our back pocket. All right, folks, if we can figure out verbs and subjects, if we can identify those, then in our next video, it's going to be so much easier to figure out independent or dependent clauses. And if we can figure out independent and dependent clauses, we can figure out every punctuation mark we need. Thanks so much for your hard work, folks. Let's go ahead and close out our work today by making sure we're in good shape and we can identify verbs and subjects.